The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint hum of streetlights and the distant cry of sirens echoing through the city. It was a strange night, the kind of night that seemed to carry secrets on the wind, making even the shadows stretch long and restless. At the entrance of the city hospital, where tired doctors shuffled in and out after long shifts,
exactly is going
something
on?
unusual stirred the calm.
Scary.
A large, gray wolf emerged from the darkness, its paws silent against the pavement, its golden eyes glinting with a mixture of fear and determination. Draped carefully in its powerful jaws was not prey, nor scraps of food, but a bundle wrapped in a torn, blood-stained cloth. Inside that fragile bundle was a newborn baby, no more than a few days old, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The sight was so surreal that at first, the night guard, who had been dozing at his desk, blinked twice to convince himself he was not dreaming. Wolves did not belong in cities, and certainly not in hospitals, but here it was, carrying a life as if it understood the urgency of the place it had chosen. The automatic sliding doors parted with a low hiss as the wolf stepped inside, its claws clicking faintly against the polished floor. Nurses gasped in horror, some stepping back, others frozen in disbelief. A wild animal inside a hospital was danger enough, but the presence of a baby in its jaws sent waves of shock rippling through the staff. Yet the wolf did not snarl or lunge. Its movements were slow, deliberate, protective. It walked straight toward the emergency ward, pausing only when a trembling nurse dared to step forward. She had tears brimming in her eyes, torn between the instinct to run and the overwhelming need to save the fragile infant. The wolf lowered its head gently, placing the bundle on a stretcher, and then stepped back, watching with an intensity that felt almost human. The baby let out a faint, weak cry that pierced through the sterile air. Doctors rushed forward, cradling the child, shouting orders, preparing equipment, while the wolf stood silently at the doorway, its golden eyes never leaving the infant. Something about the creature's presence was both terrifying and heartbreaking, as though it carried a story no one yet understood. And in that moment, as the baby was wheeled away into the bright lights of the emergency ward, one nurse collapsed against the wall, clutching her chest, already sensing that behind this strange arrival, the emergency ward buzzed with frantic energy as the doctors surrounded the newborn, their voices rising and overlapping with medical jargon that most of the nurses could barely follow. The infant was pale, its breath shallow, and its heartbeat faint, as though the fragile thread of life was slipping away with every passing second. One nurse rushed to prepare an oxygen mask while another placed in foreline, her hands trembling as she worked. The chief pediatrician, a woman with years of experience etched into the lines of her face, barked calm but urgent instructions, her eyes betraying a flicker of worry that she tried to hide from her staff. Yet, despite the chaos, one thought weighed heavily on everyone's mind. Where had this child come from, and why had a wolf, of all creatures, brought it here? Out in the hallway, the wolf remained seated, its massive form still and watchful like a silent guardian. The hospital staff kept their distance, whispering among themselves in both fear and awe. Some believed the animal must have been trained, while others muttered about omens and curses, trying to make sense of the impossible. But the nurse who had first stepped forward, a young woman named Clara, could not tear her eyes away from the wolf. Something about the way it sat, calm, unthreatening, its gaze fixed firmly on the door behind which the baby now lay, sent shivers down her spine. It wasn't acting like a predator. It wasn't even acting like an animal. It was behaving as if it understood everything, as if it had chosen to protect that child until safe hands took over. Clara's heart raced as she remembered the brief moment when the wolf had placed the bundle down. The gentleness in that act was unlike anything she had ever seen. She stepped closer to the glass window that separated the waiting area from the emergency ward, her eyes darting between the struggling infant and the silent wolf. Questions flooded her mind. Was this baby abandoned in the forest? Was it attacked, its parents gone? Or was there a darker truth, something unspoken that even the wolf itself carried with it? Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears as she thought of the child's fragility. A strange bond tugged at her heart, a connection she could not explain, as though fate had chosen her to witness this night, this miracle, this horror all at once. Behind her, the wolf let out a low, mournful sound, neither growl nor whine, but something deeper, a sound of loss, of sorrow. It echoed faintly down the sterile corridor, freezing every nurse and doctor mid-step. For a fleeting second, the hospital seemed to fall into silence, and Clara knew, with a certainty she could not explain, that this wolf was more than just a messenger of fate. It was a keeper of a secret, and when that secret was revealed, it would change everything. Hours seemed to pass like minutes as the doctors fought to stabilize the child. Tubes, monitors, and machines crowded the small hospital bed where the newborn lay, each beep and pulse a fragile reassurance that life still clung stubbornly to its tiny body. Outside, the wolf had not moved. It sat in the same place, unmoving, its golden eyes fixed firmly on the ward, as though it knew the child's life depended on its watch. Nurses and staff dared not go near it, yet none could bring themselves to force it away either. There was something sacred in its presence, a gravity that silenced even the bravest of them. Clara, still shaken, had been allowed inside the emergency ward to assist, but her gaze often drifted to the window, where the wolf's silhouette loomed against the cold hospital lights. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the chief pediatrician removed her gloves with a sigh, wiping sweat from her brow. "The baby is stable, for now," she announced, her voice weary but relieved. A collective breath of relief swept through the room, but for Clara, relief quickly twisted into a storm of questions. She leaned closer to the tiny child, brushing a strand of damp hair from its forehead, and whispered softly, almost to herself, "Who are you, little one? And why was it him who carried you here?" As if in answer, the wolf outside stirred, its ears twitching as though it had heard her words through the glass. Clara's chest tightened, her curiosity battling with a gnawing fear. Unable to resist any longer, she left the ward and slowly approached the animal, her steps cautious but determined. The wolf did not move, did not growl, only watched her with those deep, ancient eyes. The following morning, the hospital carried a strange stillness. News of the wolf's arrival had already spread among the staff, whispered in corridors and break rooms like the telling of a ghost story. But for Clara, who had barely slept, the night's events weighed heavier than idle gossip. She returned to the ward at dawn, her steps drawn toward the newborn's crib. The baby's color had improved, its breath stronger now, though it remained fragile, a delicate soul clinging to life. Clara leaned over, gently tucking the blanket around the infant, when she noticed something she hadn't before. There, on the baby's tiny wrist, was a faint mark, a scar shaped almost like a crescent moon. Her breath caught in her throat. It was no ordinary birthmark. It looked deliberate, as though carved by fate itself. Questions swirled in her mind, but before she could gather her thoughts, a low growl rumbled through the hallway. She turned quickly to see the wolf standing at the far end, its gaze fixed on her. Unlike the night before, its eyes no longer seemed merely protective. They seemed pleading, urging her to see something she had overlooked. Against her better judgment, Clara stepped away from the crib and walked toward the creature. With every step, her fear ebbed, replaced by a strange calm, as though the wolf's presence itself whispered reassurance. She stopped only a few feet away, her heart pounding. "You know this child, don't you?" she asked softly. The wolf's ears twitched, and it lowered itself to the ground, bowing its head. The gesture struck Clara with such force that tears pricked her eyes. She crouched down, daring to meet its golden gaze up close. In those eyes, she saw more than an animal. She saw grief, devotion, sacrifice. Memories that were not her own seemed to flood her heart. A forest at night, the cry of a baby left alone, blood on leaves, a desperate choice made under the weight of love. Clara gasped and stumbled back, clutching her chest. Somehow, impossibly, she understood. The wolf was not a random savior. It was the child's guardian, perhaps even once part of a life the baby had lost. Her thoughts spiraled. Had the wolf belonged to the child's parents? Had it witnessed something unspeakable? Or was there a deeper truth, one that blurred the line between man and beast? The crescent-shaped scar burned in her memory as she glanced back at the infant, then at the wolf. A sudden realization gripped her. The story of this child and the wolf were bound together, threads of a mystery that no science or medicine could explain. And Clara, whether she wanted to or not, was now part of that story. The truth came quietly, not through words, but through revelation that seemed to bloom in Clara's heart as the hours passed. Later that day, an old man was brought into the hospital, his body frail, his breath shallow. He had been found unconscious near the forest's edge, not far from where the wolf must have come. When Clara was called to help, she recognized something about him immediately. His clothes were torn, blood-stained, and his hands bore scratches as if from a desperate fight. When the man awoke, his first word was not of himself, but of the child. "The baby, is he alive?" he rasped, tears filling his weary eyes. Clara nodded quickly, assuring him the child was safe. Relief washed over his face, but grief followed just as swiftly. With a trembling voice, he told his story. He was the child's grandfather. His daughter, the baby's mother, had been killed in a violent attack on their remote cabin at the edge of the woods. Bandits, ruthless and merciless, had left nothing but destruction behind. In the chaos, the old man had tried to flee with the newborn, but he had been injured, collapsing before he could reach safety. The wolf lifted its head at her words, and for the first time, Clara thought she saw peace flicker in those golden eyes. Moments later, the infant's soft cry drifted from the ward, and the wolf turned toward the sound, its body trembling with unspoken love. Then, with one last look at Clara, a look that felt like farewell, it rose silently and padded toward the exit. No one stopped it. No one dared. The door slid open, and the wolf disappeared into the dawn, leaving behind a baby who would live because of its devotion, and a nurse whose tears had sealed the memory of a night she would never forget.